What's up, everybody? Talking point of the week, episode 3. Today we got Genghis Khan and Making of the Modern World. Wow. Oh my gosh. This book I actually got it recommended to me from listening to Tim Ferriss' podcast. He interviewed, I don't remember, some lady, some like journalist or something like that. She said this was her favorite book, and when she said that, he exclaimed, he was like, "Oh my gosh, I love this book. I've given it to so many people." And I was like, "Wow, okay, I'm gonna read this." So I took a chance and I got it. It's the genre is so weird to describe. It is a history book, but it feels like you're reading a story. It feels like you're reading a fiction, which is pretty crazy. It's obviously all true, and it's a narrative of his life and kind of how he affected the world and how the world responded to him and the Mongol army and horde and culture as a whole. And oh my gosh, it's so enlightening because you take a peek in history and the world, not only the world, but no, or excuse me, not only the Mongols, but the world, how we've gotten to where we are right now. How have we gotten here? And the Mongols played a huge part in that because they were a huge dissemination of all cultures and technologies and beliefs. Meaning, actually, they talked about this. Genghis Khan, what he would do, he would invite Christian advisors and priests, and then he'd invite Taoists, and then Buddhists and Muslim, uh, different religious factor people, and just getting them, all of them in one tent, metaphorically, all in one place, and they'd discuss for days what the meaning of life was, if there was heaven, what true God was there. They were just trying to figure out, and he did that. That had never been done ever. He did that for the reason of trying to figure out, okay, there's all these different religions. Which one is right? What parts of religions are right, and what other parts of other religions may be right? And that's how he did things. He would bring cultures together and mix them, and he was really the first culture mixing pot, even before America was, because you hear about that all the time. America is a big mixing pot of cultures. Well, he started that back in 1200 or 1100, late 1100s, when he was alive. And it's pretty cool. It starts with how, and again, they're referencing these really old texts to do this, but they're referencing how he started, like where he was born. It's not totally known, but they're using all these old texts to look at his childhood and what he did, kind of how he came to power, and it's really interesting. It feels like you're reading a fiction book. It talks about, he had a best friend, and they did all these like tribal things together that signified that they were brothers, and they held those truths really closely in the Mongol culture. Anything about swearing or like even like sniffing each other was you're getting that person's soul, and they did all these things together, the Genghis Khan and his best friend. And then they separated for 20 years, and then they came back as two rival leaders, and they battled for years and years and years. Ultimately, Genghis Khan came out on top. But it's just so interesting to see his life and see all the parallels that we may face in our lives with similar things. And it's just such a good book because it's so deep, enriching, and knowledgeable about the history of how the world came to be. They would bring many cultures together. They spread from China all the way to very, very West Europe, and they brought Chinese technology all the way through the roads, through Mongolia, all the way to Europe, and then vice versa, Europe through the Mongolia roads, all the way to China. And they used siege engines in war, and they would use the catapults that they just borrowed technology from. They even had old-fashioned flamethrowers. They'd have a bamboo chute filled with gunpowder, light it somehow. They didn't explain how it worked, but blow it out and it'd be a flamethrower. And it's just so cool how they implemented other people's use of technology to make their own culture more signified and more lethal on the battlefield. Back then, they fought really traditional. They would line up and charge and have infantry, and their army had no infantry. They only had cavalry. They all rode horseback. So that was a totally different thing in and of itself. And I'm skipping the whole part that I say the Mongol army. There was no Mongol army before Genghis Khan was alive. There were just many, many, many different tribes, many different regions, all warring. He had to go through wars, go through bloody battles, killing his own, metaphorical family, and attack all these tribes and conquer tribes, and then get rebelled against, and then run away and he got his wife stolen, and then he saved her. He had to go through so much bloodshed, so much pain, so much hardship, but he knew if he made it through it, if he did it, if he kept going, he ultimately would take over and become the leader of the Mongol race. And that's what he did. He brought everybody together for the first time. They still look at him as the leader of the Mongol nation. He is the most important person in Mongol hearts today, 800 years later. Just let that sink in. So it's pretty powerful to read a biography and a story narrative about this guy, because he took it, going on my prior example, he took so much technology and innovation from other people and even his own nation. They grew up as hunters where he lived in more of the northern Mongolia, and he used hunting tactics whenever they would fight. So when other people would line up, like I was saying, they would run in with, a couple horses or something. I say a couple, probably a couple thousand or a couple hundred, and they'd kind of charge, and then they'd retreat, and then the army would chase them, and they'd chase them for hours or maybe even for days. And then once the other army, the European armies that they mostly talked about, started to thin out, the rest of the Mongol army that was lying in wait while a little unit was getting chased, they would just circle them and cut them off. And that's how they conquered so many nations. They used tactics that were not well known to conquer over their enemy and outsmart them. They talked a lot about how he viewed them as they were hunting animals. They weren't battling, they were hunting animals. So you got to outsmart the animal in order to conquer them. It's not a battle of strength, it's a battle of using your tools and your knowledge that animals don't. And I think that's so crazy important in anything. Obviously, I'm not fighting in any battles, or we're not doing that on a day-to-day life, but I feel what's important about that is using strategy and technique to your advantage in winning whatever battle you're doing, whether that's finances, whether that's training, whether that's working out, whether that's a literal confrontation, or anything hard in your life. You have to use techniques and knowledge and plan things out and then try and apply. If it doesn't work, trash it. Apply something else. Use it until it works. So I feel like that's very important. And then one other thing I want to add is he really revolutionized the whole system of how they ran their own nation and country. He implemented a system of decimals, so they would structure their regiments and their army of units of 10, and they'd have 10 guys with one leader, and that was called something in some Mongol language. And then those 10 of those units would make up a unit of 100, where one guy was in charge, and then 10 of those units, 100 units, would make up a unit of 1,000, finally making up a unit of 10,000, and then they had a unit of 100,000. So no army had ever done that. It was just kind of random. Y'all are with that guy. There's a certain amount of number with that guy, and that's how I think just people generally like to run things. They don't like to make it. They think the more structured it's going to be more complicated. But he established systems and structures that actually made the system run smoother as a whole, as cogs turning rather than someone having to keep track. And you may not even know, pull these many people back then. We have about 20,000 men. No, he knew exactly how many men he would call and lead and how many men to send on certain missions. And he just established dominance and technique and flawless execution of information in every area of his life. And I think that really stemmed from his childhood. He grew up in a very harsh environment. They had to hunt for food. They were just eating like rats and beavers and stuff in southern Siberia and northern Mongolia. And he used his environment to his advantage. You use whatever you learn in your environment, whether you grow up in a very harsh environment, maybe a very volatile environment, something that isn't safe, almost similar to how he grew up. You use what you learned. If you grow up in a nice and a comforting and easy environment where things are provided for you, good. Don't let that comfort you. Don't let that baby you. Realize you have those things. Realize what it could be like if you don't have those things, and then start to get those things yourself because you have so many resources and affordances going for you. I would put myself in a very similar bucket to that. I am so lucky. I am so blessed to grow up in America, grow up in McKinney. I have my own room. I'm getting to live in someone else's house, and they're providing food for me. Do you know how freaking lucky I am? And oh my gosh, this is so crazy. I'd be crazy not to do something with it. So it's that same thing. Use whatever you have, whatever you grow up with, to your affordance, to your benefit. Do something with it. Use your environment to become great and establish greatness in the world. And that's what I learned from this book. and I love it. Top 3 books to this day for sure. I might say that a lot because it's so hard to make a actual top 3, but I love this book. Such a good book, such a good read. Highly recommend it. Peace.